Walk us through the highlights today. The room was packed. Conspiracy theorist Alex Jones was there, interestingly, probably one of the many people interested in these discussions around shadow banning. But were there any surprises?
It's certainly been a marathon of hearings, and one of them is still ongoing. The Senate hearing, you certainly saw that the lawmakers were more prepared and quite aligned on the issues that they really wanted to hit the tech companies on. We also saw Facebook and Twitter really evolve their statements to say that this is their number one priority, to stop abuses, to stop foreign election meddling. And there were also a lot of questions about, are they adequately equipped to deal with the evolving threats? Many lawmakers brought up the new coordinated misinformation campaign that was coming from Russia and Iran. Now, in the hearing that is still ongoing, we did see the tone shift. It took a much more political tone, and we saw the Democratic and Republican lawmakers really start to divide and be quite combative towards each other. Since the Republican lawmakers really wanted to focus on alleged censorship on these platforms, while Democratic lawmakers really saw this as an invented conspiracy that Republicans are using to push their ideals in preparation ahead of the midterms. However, the conversation did steer towards several other issues, in addition to data privacy, regulation, and election interference. And Jack Dorsey has really kept his cool throughout all of this. This was his first time testifying, and it was quite impressive how he was able to methodically and in his own Dorsey-like introspective way respond to all of the lawmakers' questions.
Dorsey was perhaps more contrite than investors might have wanted him to be. We saw Twitter shares fall. We saw Facebook shares fall as well. Laura, what did you make of what we heard from both Dorsey and Sandberg? Was there any new information here?
Thanks, Emily. You know, there really wasn't much new information here. I think what we heard from them was a recognition that there's a problem, a recognition that they have an obligation to do something about it, but extremely short on specifics in terms of what that actually means. I agree with Senator Warner's assessment that we are hearing more in terms of a willingness to cooperate, potentially with government in terms of tackling this problem. One of the things that the members asked about at a couple of different points was information sharing across the platforms with one another. This is a problem that isn't confined to just one platform. These, our adversaries are using different platforms to different ends. And really, to tackle the problem, we've got to be able to pull all that information together. Jack Dorsey, in particular, came up really short in terms of saying, what they have in place to actually share that kind of information. This is nearly 2 years after the 2016 election. And we're still talking about needing to develop ways to tackle the problem rather than actually doing that in a meaningful way. That's what really concerns me.
Interestingly, they talked a bit about how they are working together. And Sheryl Sandberg, repeatedly talked about what Facebook is doing and has done to combat this behavior. Take a listen to what Sandberg had to say about inauthentic behavior on the platform.
Well, finding inauthentic behavior is a challenge, and I think you're seeing us put real resources to bear. This is why we're investing so heavily in people and technology. This is why we're investing in programs like verification. I think the other step we're taking here is around transparency.
Meantime, Selena, Dorsey has talked about how Twitter just doesn't have resources at the scale that Facebook has. And so, what is the answer when it comes to Twitter? Can Twitter do anything at this point to stop these kind of threats, especially in a matter of weeks?
It's really interesting to see Dorsey sitting right next to Sandberg, who has a vast cash hoards and resources to deal with this issue. And we've heard Sandberg repeat over and over again that they have thousands upon thousands of content moderators, whereas Dorsey has failed to ever disclose how many moderators they have and where those employees are located. But he did mention that they're only in the hundreds. So yes, this is a vast discrepancy in terms of the types of threat that they're able to deal with. Now, the answer that Dorsey has been giving in terms of how they can best deal with this is relying on algorithms to better proactively identify threats, because thus far they've been relying on user reports to surface these issues of abuse. But the problem is that they're often miscalculating, they're too slow to answer to requests. So Dorsey's been repeating that they're hoping they can evolve their algorithms fast enough to deal with the threats. But obviously there's a lot of skepticism from lawmakers about whether this is adequate.
One of the interesting things that lawmakers tried to pin both of these companies down on was, are you American companies? Do you share American values, or are you global companies just trying to make money? Both Sandberg and Dorsey swayed towards the former. That said, you heard Senator Marco Rubio trying to pin Sandberg down on whether Facebook would still try to get into China. This, as we know, Google is exploring ways to get back into China. Take a listen to this exchange.
We would only operate in a country when we can do so in keeping with our values.
Right. And that would apply to China as well.
That would apply to China as well.
Interesting, Laura. It certainly seems there that Sandberg has closed the door on China, yet in the same breath, she said we can't connect the world without connecting China. What do you make of getting that kind of a statement on the record?
Yeah, I think these companies are really, in a way, at an inflection point. And I think that's something that one of the senators said towards the end of the hearing today. I mean, these companies have grown to what they are because of American democracy, because of American free market, because of American innovation. But they have also been operating as global platforms, and they have a market interest in being able to make that market as broad as possible. And so in a way, their origin story and frankly their continued existence as American companies that benefit from American laws is in a way at odds with their market interests. And I think at some point there will be a reckoning. We also see very, very aggressive investments by China in things like artificial intelligence, in terms of data acquisition, again in ways that are directly not only at odds with American values, but American national security. These are really big questions, and I'm not convinced the companies have been wrestling with them in the most meaningful way possible to really be able to put us in a footing where we're both safe, secure, and consistent with our values.
Now, I asked another tech CEO earlier today whether Google not showing up was a bad decision, and she said, I don't know, maybe it was a smart move, maybe it was a missed opportunity. I mean, was this a lose-lose situation for Google, Laura, or should they have been there?
Well, in my book, this is about actually getting to the bottom of dealing with this problem and developing solutions. And either Google wants to be a part of that or they don't. And for me, not showing up today means that they don't actually want to be part of that solution. They are absolutely a part of this problem, and any attempt to act otherwise is misguided just because they are not a, quote, social media platform. This is about manipulation of the broader online information ecosystem. There are search algorithms are gamed by RT and Sputnik and other Russian propaganda outlets. YouTube is a hotbed for Russian activity. They are absolutely part of this, and either they want to be part of the solution or they're not. And the message today that they sent was they do not want to be.
Selena, what's next? Sandberg talked about being open to regulation. It's a matter of what that regulation is. Now that these hearings have wrapped up, certainly lawmakers aren't going to stop asking questions. But, when do we see some of this stuff discussed today actually implemented in potential legislation?
It does seem that it's only a matter of time until this does become regulated. We heard the lawmakers say that the Wild West days of social media are over, and Warner recently put out a white paper with 20 different legislative ideas. That being said, none of these particular ideas have come even close to fruition, but many ideas were thrown out. Some of them included maybe putting some controls on Section 230 that have given these companies immunity essentially from any legal liability for what content users post. A lot of lawmakers brought up the issue of opioid and other illicit drugs that are being advertised on the platform, and that maybe they should be held responsible for potential deaths that come from that information. There have also been discussions about maybe a type of European GDPR data privacy law that becomes implemented here in the U.S. There's obviously also this Honest Ads Act that these companies say they are all for, which would bring more transparency to political advertising, but we have yet to see what type of regulation will come from all of this. And in this hearing that is just about wrapping up, one of the lawmakers actually derided the chairman of the House Energy Commerce Committee, saying that despite the litany of hearings that have been held over the past several months, there's almost nothing to show for it from the side of the lawmakers.
Laura, will we see action here, or is this just going to be a lot of talk?
So I think we will eventually see action, but I think there's going to be a lot of talk before that still. I do really worry, as Selena just alluded to, that in particular on some of the more partisan aspects of this issue, that it's going to be very difficult to get legislation to actually move. There are a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced with bipartisan support in both houses of Congress, but they have not seen hearings, markups in their committees, or any kind of floor time in terms of actually moving forward. I think at this point, the chances of serious legislation moving anytime before the midterms is really unrealistic, and I think the focus has to be on how we look forward. But I absolutely agree that the kinds of proposals that Senator Warner put forward in his white paper, they were essentially for him, some of them were rather provocative, but that's what he wanted it to be. This is the conversation our policymakers need to be having. The reality is Europe is regulating in this space. They're sort of beginning to chart the global rules. China, through its market alone, is beginning to set the global rules. If we in the United States aren't actually setting forth what a smart regulatory framework is that protects privacy, that is consistent with free market principles, that continues to allow for innovation, other countries are going to be setting the rules for us, and that's not in our interest either.